It's very well known in research that fathers are vital to children's welfare, whether together with the mother or not.
We looked at mothers' reports of how well their children were doing after separation, and essentially the story was exactly the same, that the children who saw more of their fathers, who had frequent and regular contact with their fathers, who felt close and involved with their fathers, were doing much better in terms of adjustment. I mean, there's completely clear, unequivocal pattern of results.
Back in the 70s, their whole objective is to create a society where women don't actually need men, whereby they can raise their children, and if they want the man there, they can have him there, and if they don't, he can just disappear. And it's a society that we're slowly moving into. It's not a very healthy one, because children don't, as a rule, benefit from a single-parent family. They're usually worse off as a result of not having a father. It's not to say that there's not single mums out there not doing a good job, I'm not saying that, but all the evidence in terms of health, education, prospects, that sort of thing, childbirth, you know, when you get teenage pregnancies and all the rest of it, most of that comes from a single-parent setup. So it's not healthy for society, but the radical feminists, that is a society that are pushing us into.
And heaven knows what this is doing for children. Children need to have men and women in their lives.
If you can look at all the family tax credit systems and that type of thing, and payments to encourage the childcare facilities and that sort of thing, then obviously that's the route that they're taking. And if it appeals to women, and women have been told and brainwashed over the years that you've got to go back out to work, and they have been brainwashed, and there's all these childcare facilities as well, then you end up with a society that's moving along that line of its own volition.
I worked in the Park Referral Unit, which was a unit where children were expelled from school, and every child apart from one come from a broken home, and that was quite scary. That could be my child or my children in that unit in 5 years' time.
But the police, government and businesses like the NSPCC all want to reduce the involvement of men in children's upbringing, and so they deny the importance of fathers.
What have we become that we allowed this system to continue when we know the damage that it's doing? It breaks our hearts, destroys our children, it's ruinous for society, it makes the culture vulgar and perverse. It costs a fortune, and it flies in the face of everything we know as humans.
It's precisely because of the damage to society that results from the forced removal of fathers that this system exists.
Wait till your father gets, wait till your father gets home.
One of the main reasons that fathers are so important to upbringing is that men are generally far better at disciplining children than women.
You could be the baddest mama on earth. I don't give a fuck how good you are. Ain't nothing you can say more powerful than, I'm gonna tell your daddy. Can't fuck with it. Can't come closer, I'm gonna tell your daddy.
This is certainly not about hitting children. It's about knowing how to be firm but fair and setting boundaries.
My son is 9 years old, he's 10 next birthday, and he can already walk all over his mum. But he can't do that with me, and I don't have to raise my voice at him, I just have to look at my son and he knows that he's pushed it too far and he won't push it any further. So there's no smacking, there's no basically shouting, it's just a look. Where he hasn't got that with the mum, he can walk all over her.
But well-disciplined children don't become criminals, don't become vulnerable to abuse, and don't need government intervention. This is bad news for a long list of agencies. The discipline provided by men doesn't just apply to his own children. The positive influence of men extends to all children they come across, but this influence has been ceaselessly eroded, such that now, men are considered suspect for showing any interest whatsoever in children and their welfare.
You got a light?
You gotta be kidding me. Total, look at this kid.
Jesus Christ, what are you, 13? And you getting high? You're not gonna give us a lecture, are you?
No, not a lecture, a life lesson.
We're primed by the negative activities of the NSPCC and the government to actually expect aberrant behaviour from men around children, and so any accusation is readily believed. In self-defence, men are forced to distance themselves from children for fear of what they may be accused of.
Just put the joint down, kid.
Just give me a light, old man, or I'll tell my dad you put your hand on my knee.
Problems with children today is because adults have distanced themselves to such an extent and are too scared anyway to get too close to them, the children aren't being fed the right information. They're having to discover it for themselves. There's no one to be close enough to lead them through the emotional situations, to guide them closely. And they're seen as they're kind of objects. They're distant from a man's point of view. Children are kind of distant objects unless they happen to have their own. And so in a sense we're no nearer than we were in the Victorian era, if you see what I mean. You see children around you in the streets, maybe getting up to mischief, maybe playing truant. Nobody says anything. Jimmy Bulger, wasn't he? He was walked out of the middle of the shopping centre, and so you have little Jimmy Bulger, the two boys who eventually killed him, walking around the street during school hours. Nobody says anything. The alienation of men from children. For men to feel safe around children, the best thing that they can do is to be cold and distant. And that's exactly what they've become. Men have become cold and distant to a large extent. So, for example, male teachers won't go near the children. They'll be rigid. And so children grow up thinking, God, men are cold and distant. And they are. They have to be, for their own protection. And I, as a male, resent that very deeply, and I think a lot of men do as well. And they're angered by it. And a lot of boys have missed out as a result of that, boys in particular. I mean, it's a double whammy for them, because if they haven't got the male role model, and they haven't got the affection, they're missing a lot. Hence all the delinquency. Hence almost the psychopathy in our society.
The government and charities want themselves to be the only agencies involved in child protection, instead of the most appropriate and the most effective child protector on the planet, men. Perversely, by removing men from protecting children, they create much larger numbers of children in need of protection. This should be ironic, but it's actually great for business. Both girls and boys need the guidance and example of their fathers, but in different ways. Girls need the example of a man and father.
I got a little baby girl, right? And it's amazing when you have a girl. You're a man, you have a girl. It's eye-opening. Because I realized I'm the man in her life. And my relationship with my daughter is going to affect her relationship with men for the rest of her life. And every man in here is dating a woman with some daddy issues.
Boys need discipline and someone to look up to. The average 13-year-old boy is stronger than his mum, but he's not stronger than his dad. On a fundamental level, boys need to know that their parent is stronger than them.
There's less and less control in families because quite often they're single-parent families. You haven't got a dad there to keep control, and I don't care what anybody says. When you've got a young man coming up to 16, 17, 18 in the house, you need a father there to keep him in line. Even my sister, who's been a single mum for years, very anti-male, I don't need a bloke and all that sort of tosh. Of course, when her boy got to 16 or 17, she actually said to me, I never thought I'd say this to you, Steve, she said, but I could really do with a man in the house just to keep him in line.
This is why Childline and other NSPCC activities and government child services are so insidious. They seek to usurp the father as head of the household and the main authority in the family, and replace him with external forces.
Threaten to phone child services. Why? Because if you phone child services, they'll come and take your dad away and he'll get in trouble. You won't even have to call. Just pretend. It'll scare the shit out of him. You're 10 years old, you figure out how to scare the shit out of your dad? That's like finding kryptonite.
These agencies want to prevent discipline being applied to children and prevent families from solving their own problems. This leads directly to family breakdown and wayward children, which is precisely what they depend on for their business. Mothers assist in this process of family destruction by failing to understand how they're being used against fathers. What does the government gain from demonising men in this way?
I think at the very back of all this, at the very early days of the feminist movement, was a concept from women who were in the movement that the family should be deemed the mother and the children. That was the family unit. And as far as they were concerned, fatherhood was expendable. And slowly, as the laws became slanted towards women and children, the concept came about that women would go out to work and the state would provide childcare for the children. And in a sense, that is lingering behind everything that's even going on today. Single-parent mothers are encouraged to go out to work and find other alternatives for their children. There is no concept that a childless father is far more likely to become an adolescent criminal than a fathered and mothered child. And that if the father is not in the family, why on earth should the mother then desert her children and be forced out to work?
And the other part to that is, why would men tolerate that? Why aren't men aware of this situation, or more men aware of it?
Well, here lies the tragedy. 30 years ago, I was trying to talk to men and warning them and saying to them, if you do not watch out, this political ideology, this whole concept of radical feminism will spread, and you will lose your homes, your incomes, and your families and your children. And they laughed, because as far as men are concerned, they didn't take responsibility for relationships.
What's going on here? Men thought this was equality, so they sat back and let it all happen, and then suddenly realised that they were being shafted.
And to this day they still don't. Men who personally suffer a loss because they have become divorced from a virulent wife who's made it her business to see that he never sees his children, they get involved, usually for a short period of time, and they move on. The tragedy is the fathers' movements right the way across the world have never managed to establish themselves as a coherent, powerful source of opposition. Unlike the feminist movement, women are far better than men in networking and organising and working with each other, particularly over emotional issues. Men, I'm afraid, in the dark ages when it comes to this.
The destruction of family led by feminists is like a scorched earth policy. Women won't be able to go back from feminism even if they wanted to. The concept of family has been so thoroughly wrecked, they won't know what it is. When children run amok, joining gangs, being violent, committing crime, and generally being antisocial, this strengthens government. They can use the inexplicable problem of wild children to further attack family, create more police officers, increase taxation, and draft new laws to increase their power in society.
So these young lads are just, they're getting out of control, and probably not so bad round here because we live in a rural sort of area, but in the inner city parts of London and places like that, I cannot imagine what these young men are behaving like now. You've got an increasingly violent society. You've got no respect at all, as I see it, between young men and young women. And I saw all that happening in the 80s and 90s.
There's definitely a breakdown in family. The number of divorces is the highest I think it has ever been. The number of children on the streets, children without fathers, are growing up in an environment where they really have to cater for themselves as opposed to receive guidance from their parents, is causing untold harm to children and to adults. And it has broken down as a result of the ideology that has been inflicted upon us, and as a result of the demonisation of the family through the feminist movement.
Discipline in the home provided by fathers leads directly to less power for government, fewer jobs in the police and prison industry, and less income from money-making businesses like the NSPCC.
My problem with this is that you're putting people in the state more for the rest of their life. You're putting them in the system like criminals. And everything we've talked about are systems of the state. There's this, then you have to report to judges who can then call you in and have you referred, and then there's welfare officers and mediators examining you to find your wire, that sort of person. It's very Orwellian. And the endless interference because you've just broken up with your missus. Fuck off. Get out of my life. That's it. And save yourself a few quid in the bargain, the state. I generally, what's the problem?
The problem is that the government doesn't want to fuck off. It wants people in the system. It needs people in the system. It needs as many people in the system as possible because it justifies their existence and increases their authority.
It's about the law being able to, the law by recognising what's going on can then intervene more directly in people's private lives. It puts people within the remit of law and then they can be controlled again.
This is why government will frequently deny their own research and claim that fathers are not that important to upbringing, and indeed are often detrimental to the child. Do you think that there's any discrimination against two-parent families in our society today?
Yes, I do. I think there's a very interesting paper that was written by Harriet Harman Patricia Hewitt and Anna Coote in 1990. It was a policy paper for the Labour Party. And one of the remarks that was made with the three women was saying that men weren't necessarily harmonious in family life. And those women are now in positions of great power.
I just find it amazing that someone can be in a position like that with the stated opinions that she has.
No,
she's not even hiding
she's there
them.
for a perfectly good reason to continue with her stated opinions. Ultimately, I mean, this is my political thinking. Ultimately, if a government eradicates the male voice, men's voices, they can control. And if society is largely created around women and children, then it's a very easy society to run. Men are mavericks, men are a nuisance. One father, one mother, under one roof with its biological children. That's no longer supported.
Something is going on with family life in Western society. Many men are not with mother and child. The question is, why is this happening? What artificial set of circumstances is now driving many men away from family relationships? The pressures are manifold. Men are presented as being worthless in popular media.
A long time ago, I asked God to send me a decent man. I got Robert, Cedric, Daryl, and Kenneth. God's got some serious explaining to do.
There are no good men. Now I read this article, and on average, there are 2 per state.
The role of men in families has been systematically attacked, with fathers presented as unnecessary and even dangerous around their own wives and children.
What are we gonna do? I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Oh, guys like you always say you don't know what you're gonna do until you do it. I think you know exactly what you were gonna do. You were gonna kill your wife and child. Yeah.
Don't worry, Marwan. I give you my word. My wife and son will be dead by the end of this day.
Men and women have been artificially put in competition with each other. Our biological programming as humans is quite simple in this respect. Women want to be with men that they can look up to, depend on and admire. Men want to be with women who are supportive and feminine. Men do not want to compete with women.
We were just sitting at a table in a bar, and some guy had his chair out too far, so it was squashing into her. And she completely flew off the handle. It was unwarranted. She turned around and swore at him. I said, "Can you move your blasted fucking chair?" It's like, right, this is not an attractive thing. I'm not feeling it right now. So yeah, that kind of, and I guess that's kind of that kind of masculinity around a woman is unattractive.
Yeah, but what would happen if that guy turned around and wanted
Well, of course,
to
he's going to start on me. So he's not going to slap her. She's a woman. He's going to start on me. Nothing to do with me. Actually, no. She probably would have taken it.
You must have done The fundamental fact of life is that women are not the opposite sex. They're the complementary sex. But government and business have convinced women that they should be competing with men, and we all suffer for it.
They prefer men who have more status and resources than they do. Once upon a time, this was thought that the only reason women go for men with money is because, for various reasons, women don't have money of their own, so they were forced to. But it turns out that even when women are financially independent, they're still looking for males who have more money than they do. So if you start with the basic expectation that women would like to marry up, they're looking for men with status and resources. If there's a background economic change such that it shifts the relative positions of men and women, then all of a sudden all the women that are sort of looking up for their preferred partner, all of a sudden there's less of them to go around. You might expect that men with less resources would prefer women with resources. But not only are those women not interested in men like that, but the men aren't interested in women like that either.
As discrimination against men leads to more and more women earning more than men, being more highly qualified than men, and competing for the same jobs as men, the pool of available eligible men shrinks. Feminism has only succeeded in reducing women's options and making them unhappy in their lives. Women want to have children, but they don't want to be with the fathers. This is bad for everyone except social services.
Well, who needs men, right? Bloody useless.
Divorce, child custody and child support has been so thoroughly biased in women's favour that it's often financially beneficial for the woman to remove the father from the household. Indeed, women are encouraged to divorce and separate rather than being encouraged to work hard at their relationships. The glue of family and society is being dissolved.
As we've grown in society towards a situation whereby people are getting married less often. In fact, a lot of babies now are born outside wedlock compared with 20 or 30 years ago. This means that a lot of men have even less rights because single dads don't have enough rights, and so there's been a lot of protests about this, and I think rightly so, because I think that it does affect men's health, and also I think that children do need to have socialisation from both parents.
So, women always complain about, we can't get through here, there's a glass ceiling. We should look at the glass ceiling and bring up children. Jesus. It's not even a ceiling, we're not allowed to. It's not that we don't want to, it's that we're totally not allowed to bring up our children.
Also, then, they will think very carefully about what they're doing when they do split, because at the moment it's too easy. And the trauma that's caused by the current system is just appalling.
That where there's a custody battle, in around 9 out of 10 cases, the child is awarded to the woman rather than to the man. If there's a debate, men very often have not seen their children. I mean, I talk to men who, because they've been, for whatever reason, because they've not seen their children, have gone to this kids' school and watched them in the playground, this kind of thing, which is rather sad. And so I think that this is an era where I think a more equal approach would be valuable.
Mothers seek to get rid of the father, but leave his wallet behind, or else turn to the state for support.
I'll give you an example. My daughter, she split from her husband a couple of 3 years ago, and she freely admitted, she said, I can't believe, she said, the amount of money that I'm getting now that I didn't get before. Paid my rent, my rates, I'd have got my family tax credits, I'd have got the child benefit, and I'd have got the support from Nick as well. She said, I'm better off financially as a single mother, she said, than I was when I was with Nick. And now that this other chap's moved in, they're getting married next year, as soon as he moved in, their income went down. When you actually are better off being a single mother than you were when you were married, there is something wrong with a system like that.
Women have a menu of options to assault men and destroy family, given by a government that reaps the benefit of female spite. Women don't have the wisdom to leave the powers alone, because they're too selfish to understand the consequences. The real purpose of continuously defaming men, belittling fathers, and also inflating the incidence of male child sexual abuse and male domestic violence is to dismantle the family and further separate men from children and women's lives. By using this divide and conquer technique based on lies and prejudice, the greatest protectors of children and family, men, are kept away from those most in need of protection. The reason this is being done is simple. The family unit, headed by the man, is a competitor to government and other agencies.
First thing that had to be destroyed was the family, the man, because he will not work for the state, he will work for his wife and children, and his loyalty will go to his wife and children.
Men don't bend over and do as they're told, as government would like, and men don't look to government to solve all of their problems. Men have an instinctive understanding that self-reliance is the only protection from tyranny. The same cannot be said of women. They are far more malleable and controllable. When a man looks at the world, he looks for freedom and opportunities for himself and his family. He wants the ability to succeed so that he can provide. When a woman looks at the world, she wants security and comfort. She wants to depend on someone to provide that for her. Where a man is not available, she desperately looks for a replacement. She looks to the state. This is why many were fearful of what it would mean for women to have the vote.
Amy, are you getting enough from the state?
I don't think I am, no. I think everybody stands here and says, oh, all these mums are living off benefits, not going back to work, but maybe if they gave us a little bit more leeway with childcare.
What do you get at the moment? Just
Pardon?
What sort of help do you get?
I get housing benefit and income support.
Women voting leads directly to big government. Women don't vote for less taxation and easier business regulations as men do. Women vote for more social services, more benefits, more childcare, more government departments provide help, more staff, more. Women vote for all of the things that lead to higher taxation, and that would be largely unnecessary if they restored their faith in men. But the government's success has been to divide women from men by selling the story of man's evil. If families were allowed to take care of themselves and raise their children normally, they wouldn't need social services, child support agencies in the NSPCC, lawyers and counsellors, ASBOs and increased police numbers, probation officers, higher council tax, bigger prisons and fast food restaurants for Sunday dads. The list goes on.
How does
this work and how does it maintain itself?
How does it maintain itself?
Yes.
Well, the beauty industry maintains itself by defining more and more behaviours, categorising more and more behaviours, normal behaviours, as acts of abuse. So, for example, whereas 30 years ago, the NSPCC was concerned with the killing and severe beating of children. It's now concerned with smacking children, shouting at children. It has even tried to suggest that 5-year-old boys who have an interest in 5-year-old girls are paedophiles. It's actually used those words. They're not my words, they're the NSPCC's words.
Taking men away from children generates phenomenal income, thousands of jobs, and huge political power for those responsible.
Partly because adults have been prevented from taking responsibility for the children that are around them.
The concept came about that women would go out to work and the state would provide childcare for the children. And in a sense, that is lingering behind everything that's even going on today. Single-parent mothers are encouraged to go out to work and find other alternatives for their children.
Taking men away from mothers allows them and their children to become more controllable by the state. The mother feeds and washes her children, and the excluded father is made to pay for their upbringing. But it's the government that raises the children, becoming the surrogate father and husband.